All right, here we go. Greetings and welcome back. Becoming Undone is the podcast for those who dare bravely, risk mightily, and grow relentlessly. Join me, Toby Brooks, as I invite a new guest each week where we can examine how high achievers can transform from falling apart to falling into place. Joining me today from Austin, Texas, by way of California, is author and athlete and podcast extraordinaire, Nick Peck. Nick, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Toby. I appreciate it.
So you or someone from your team had reached out to me actually and said, you've got this book coming out. And as I do, I kind of screen these things. And as the show has grown, I've gotten more. And I'm just always overwhelmed, frankly, by the stories that come across my email. And yours was no different. It was really just a tremendous background to, even though it's a fictional work, it is based in no small part on your lived experience. We're going to get into that. First things first, though, I always start off with a little bit of an easy question to kind of wade into the water. What do you want to be growing up and why?
Exactly what I'm doing now, actually. A journalist and author. I always knew it's what I wanted to do. And the reason why, I honestly can't tell you. I think I was just inspired by, authors and writers. But like, as long as I can remember, I used to go around my neighborhood selling news for kids. I would write stories and stuff like that. So honestly, I'm living the dream right now, what I'm doing. So
Tremendous, tremendous. Well, the book is Only Way Out, the story of Jalen Pierre. And this is a young man who's navigating a tough upbringing and finding redemption, love, football, brotherhood, those things. And, not to dig too deep into the personal side of this, but I know it's rooted in personal pain and triumph. When did you realize, going from that idea of always wanting to be an author and wanting to be a journalist, that you had to tell Jalen's story, even if it meant you had to reopen some old wounds?
yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, it just kind of came to me. I played, like you mentioned, I was an athlete, so I was a football player. And then once I, officially hung up my cleats and retired, so to speak, I was looking for a purpose. Even though I loved my journalism gig, I was kind of looking for a purpose. And so I kind of just, jumped straight into. I've always loved reading, always loved books. I was like, let me try this. I'm a big believer in any kind of art. You can tell when it's genuine or not, whether it's a painting or a book. And so I felt like I wanted to tell a story that was loosely rooted on experiences and stuff that I went through first. So I think that was kind of what inspired me to tell Jalen's story, was one, looking for purpose, but then also trying to have a true, genuine story. Because I believe that you can feel that in art when it's not genuine.
Absolutely. So my book project started most recent, at least, and it's based in no small part on the podcast, but initially it started as memoir. And, it was COVID lockdown, and it was like, okay, this is a time for me to dig out and really dig into my story. And what I found was, the deeper I dug, the darker it got. And there was no small amount of depression and anxiety. And I had to push away from it for a while because it was just trauma that I hadn't really fully unpacked. I think especially guys and athletes in particular were kind of taught and trained that to be vulnerable is weakness, and to talk about your feelings and your emotions, and to give legs to the fact that this is what I've been through frequently is really, really difficult. So I'm curious, was the fact that you've written this as a fictional work, but rooted in your experience, did that help you disconnect it from your own lived experience? Or did you find that it was therapeutic for you to go back through it in this way?
Honestly, it was definitely more therapeutic. And like I said, when I started writing the book itself, it was one of those moments for me where I was like, this is what I was born to do. So it's kind of just luckily just kind of in a flow state, even though it's covering these very deep, dark, personal, even personal stories. But luckily for me, I was just kind of in a flow state the whole time. And I think that kind of made it more therapeutic for me than, triggering, so to speak, just because I got to stay in that flow state and not necessarily worry about dealing with the actual traumas themselves, but instead using that flow state to develop the story and how I wanted to and stuff like
For
that.
sure, for sure. So we want to go back to the beginning. Start at wherever you would want to start the story. If we're going to ask you to give us the abridged version of your lived experience all the way up to you're a fairly young guy, so it's not like there have been a lot of years that have transpired, even though there's lots of experiences. So start at the beginning, wherever that was, and share your story.
Yeah. So as you mentioned at the top of the show, I grew up in California. I grew up in an abusive alcoholic household. On top of that, I grew up around a lot of trauma, a lot of death, a lot of things like that. And my whole life, I was just kind of looking for a way out of my situation. And luckily, early on, I found sports. And then in high school, I started playing football for the first time. And lucky enough to really find my passion there. And then was lucky enough in high school to initially earn a full ride scholarship. And then on signing day, the school that I had committed to initially called me, said, "Hey, we gave away your scholarship to someone else. Would you be willing to walk on?" And as I mentioned, I grew up in a household that I was like, no, I'm looking for a way out of my situation. And so at the time, believe it or not, I was playing offensive line. So I was about 325 pounds in high school, but I kind of grew tired of weighing that much. And so I went to junior college for a year, lost about 125 pounds and taught myself how to long snap. And then eventually, was lucky enough to finally get that full ride scholarship to long snap, did that. And then jumped into, finished my schooling and then jumped into journalism, as I mentioned. And then here I am now. But yeah, just, a lot of, been all over the place, traveled all over the place, been around a lot of, different types of trauma. But yeah, it's like the abridged version of my
Sure.
life.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that and being honest and vulnerable with it. So much of your story, as I read through your speaker kit and look through the things that you had sent through, and even the summary of your book that's rooted in no small part on your story, there's this thread of identity being forged through adversity. The fact that you had to overcome these things, setbacks like a scholarship that gets pulled in the 11th hour, setbacks like, changing a position as an athlete, and even weight and body image issues. What part of your past do you think shaped you the most into who you are today?
That's a good question. Honestly, I think it's the combination of everything because I think, had I not gone through my weight loss journey, I wouldn't have been able to be there. Had I not gone through being around a lot of trauma or a lot of abuse and death and those things, I would not be able to tell the story I needed to tell. So I think, it's a kind of a combination of everything. Even though I think a lot of time when you go through trauma, you like a lot of times you're questioning, oh, why me? Why me? But now that I'm kind of on the other side of it, I kind of more grateful for it because it made me the person I am and those kind of things. So I think it's, a combination of everything. I don't necessarily know if there's one particular event because, I was kind of living in survival mode, bobbing and weaving so long through all those trials and tribulations. So I didn't,
Yeah,
it really couldn't, there wasn't one thing that kind of, shaped me
right.
specifically.
No, that makes sense. And I think it's different for everybody. I know that anyone that's tackling a book project, some people would say, I don't care if I sell one copy, I'm writing this for me. Or maybe it's written for a special someone that helped you get through a season, and maybe you owe your life to that person. Other times we want a broader impact. There's a fine line between writing to process pain and writing to serve others. Who would you say you wrote this book for, and what do you hope that it does for them?
Yeah, I mean, on just a normal scale, I think I wrote the book initially for me and my sister. In the dedication page says dedicated to all of it. And, me and my sister, we both went through the same things. And whenever we're growing up in our life, we look at each other and be like, what's wrong? We just go all of it. And so there's that powerful impact, as well. Just to be able to do that. Cause you can see I'm covered in tattoos. So I have her writing that says all of it tattooed on me and she has mine on hers. So I would say that, but as far as the audience itself, I wrote the story in third person on purpose, not first person point of view or memoir, because I wanted the reader, whether it's male, female, young, old, regardless of sexuality, religions, anybody can kind of put themselves in the shoes of Jalen Pierre in the struggles and trials and tribulations he was going through and relate it to their own lives. Because I think we all go through different trials and tribulations and different seasons, just as Jalen does in his own story. So I kind of wrote it for everybody to show, there's ways out of your situation to find it, but then also, just that relatability of the other things that he deals with and the community he builds and those kind of things.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's wisdom in that. And there's always this fine line for an author between wanting to reach as many people as possible, but also if it's not niche enough, then it's a one size fits none. And so there can be a real challenge there to find a way so that we can use story to impact the most people. So I certainly appreciate that and respect it. I'm certainly no fiction writer myself. So you said you found refuge in football. It's a common theme in this show. that whether it's sports, frequently I'll have former military, former Navy SEALs, or special forces folks, Grammy Award winning artists, people who find purpose and find fulfillment and find early success in whatever that pursuit is. For you, it was sports. How do you think sports function as kind of that emotional life raft for young people who are growing up in chaos, kind of like you described all of it?
I think it kind of just gives you that structure that you may be missing, just at your house. But then also, I always say this, it gives you that created family. I think so many people that grow up around, trauma or, go through trials and tribulations, their immediate family aren't people that they can necessarily rely on. And luckily, sports brought that to me through the way of coaches, through the way of even professors and teachers who were helping me through those kind of things. And then even teammates. My teammates, I played football, so I had 110 brothers every single day that I stepped out on that field. So I think sports can give that, but then it also, just gives you like a literal way out. It gives you ways where you feel like you're down at the bottom and you can't get up. There's light at the end of the tunnel when you see the opportunities that sports can give to you and can create for you.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And this is 100% a compliment. But in looking at you, I wouldn't have guessed offensive lineman. Today I would have guessed maybe a tight end or a wide receiver. Like you're lean and mean these days.
Well, I'd love to
Offensive
hear it.
linemen they're wired differently. There's no stats other than penalties, and you're there to protect. And so I can certainly hear it in your voice as you talk about your sister that there's definitely a protective instinct within you. What advice would you give a young athlete who's trying to use the game to escape? In your case, you needed that scholarship. And when it gets pulled away at the last minute, man, that felt like betrayal, I'm sure. There's a fine line between speaking in, if you're mentoring a young athlete, like, yeah, this game can get you out of this circumstance. But if it falls through like it did for you, sometimes that pressure of being the way out is really pathological, right?
No, for sure. And that's why I even say when I talk to athletes now, it's like sports, it doesn't always have to be to go to the pros. I think so many people think it's, going to the pros. But to me, I was able to leverage sports to what I'm doing now to be able to do what I'm doing now. I built a network of connections, built a brand off of being an athlete to be able to get a book published and have people want to read the book and things like that. So I think that's the other twofold of it too, that you find more than just one passion. Because sometimes I think you put all your eggs in one basket, especially at that young high school age, looking for a way out of your situation, you kind of put yourself in a hole. But luckily, like I said, I knew what I wanted to do as a journalist and author. So as I was being an athlete, I was kind of building up that career as a journalist and author, writing freelance and doing those things on top of it too. So, if things did fall through like they did, I had other plans and other avenues to go. But that's not to say you give up when life throws you punches.
Right.
You keep going at it. But, I think that's the other thing that sports can bring you is you can leverage it to do so many other things. And especially in today's day and age with NIL and all the above, there's so many different opportunities for young athletes out there. So I think sports is just special in that sense.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I know in your book you touch on some really tough family dynamics. And even though it's written in the third person, I have to think that there was no small amount of psychological work on your part to kind of sort through what that lived experience meant to you. Has writing the book helped you find any peace or forgiveness toward the people that hurt you in your past?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, on top of that too, I think, we're doing a lot of therapy, and doing those kind of things, doing the work has made me found that. So I think it's the combination of both, of writing things out and the feelings and emotions that I felt, but then also using that to go into my therapy sessions and say, hey, I wrote this really hard chapter today about this and these feelings and emotions and working through them. Because I think it's one thing to write it down on paper and feel like it's therapeutic, but you actually have to do the continual work to
Yeah.
make yourself feel right, understand what you're feeling and things like that. So I would say it's probably, like therapy for me, for sure, writing it all down. But, I also had to go and do that work with a professional to be able to sort through those emotions.
Right. And what a powerful gift to have writing as an outlet. My wife is a therapist and I'm more on the so she'll take folks that have had trauma and kind of sort through that to get you back to normal operating temperature, I would call it. And then I'm more of a performance coach where I want to take someone and let's optimize your habits and your behavior so that you can accomplish And I view it very much like I'm an athletic trainer and a strength coach by trade. Well, the AT works with you, PT or orthopedic surgeon, whomever. They work to get you better when you're hurt. Once you're healthy, then the strength and conditioning coach makes you faster. They make you stronger in the weight room, those kinds of things. So being able to write like that, especially at such a young age, is, I have to think that that's a very powerful tool in your arsenal that a lot of folks your age don't have to take to therapy or to take to a coach and process through what you've actually put down into words.
No, for sure. And I think that's something that we're missing in our society today, because we're all so digital, but there is something just so powerful about having a journal and writing out your feelings and emotions there. It doesn't necessarily have to always be writing a book too, but I think something so powerful about journaling every day, even if you don't necessarily have something that you're working through, but just journaling every day. You bring up rehab and physical therapy. I think mental health and healing journeys through trauma and those kind of things. Even if you are in a good place, you have to do the prehab. You have to continue to go to therapy and seek therapy, not just when you're at the lowest of lows, but those kind of things. And writing is one of those outlets you can do that through writing in a journal daily, and just getting your thoughts and feelings down on paper is something that's really powerful.
100%. I had the good fortune of speaking with newcomers to Baylor Athletics today, whether they're transfers or freshmen, and talk a little bit about AI. And I know it's a hot topic, especially for young college students making that transition from high school. And frequently, especially young students would view AI like, oh, it's not allowed, or, this is cheating, or this is plagiarism. But what you're talking, there's no amount of chat GPT that you can go to write down your lived experience. And so, I mean, it's valuable to have that tool available to maybe process through some of your construction or how you're going to kind of create your character arcs and those kinds of things. But for you, like you said, there's really no replacement. And I love how you said pen to paper, like maybe it's not even a word processor. I mean, there's something for me therapeutic about the kinesthetic process of physically writing something down.
Oh, for sure. And I think the one thing that AI and those things can't replace, is the heart and the brain. And those are things that remember feelings and remember thoughts and remember emotions. And that's what something too physical that you can hold in your hand, like a journal. I hold a pen in my hand at all times just because it kind of gives me that peace as a writer. I feel those things, but no, there's something so valuable about actually writing stuff down, especially in this ever-changing digital world. Because I think AI, like you said, it's a tool, but it's not the end-all, be-all, especially with dealing with emotions and those kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah, completely agree. Well, another theme that comes out in this show frequently as we kind of lose identity, this idea of I go from being in pieces, I'm undone, I'm apart, to having a purpose left unfulfilled, is frequently we would put our identity in things that are temporary, whether that's sports, whether that's entrepreneurial pursuits, whether that's being an artist. Those are all things that have an expiration date on them. And frequently, my guests would talk about how they would have a transformative faith experience and how they've placed faith differently than it was when they were relying on self as an athlete or as an artist or as a Navy SEAL. Did faith play a role in your survival or your healing? And if so, how's that evolved over time?
No, it's funny you bring that up. I've actually, kind of had a transition this past year or so with it. My whole life actually growing up, I've had this weird connection with faith and always didn't grow up in a religious household by any means. But the nights that I would go to bed and be scared for my life and things like that, I'd always, for some reason, sleep with a Bible and hold the Bible and had no true connection to it either on those kind of things. And then as I've kind of transitioned out of my trauma and things like that, I've truly found peace and with a higher power and having that faith. Because I mean, when you are going through so much trials and tribulations, you kind of question, even in the book, and Jalen does it too, but he looks up to the sky and is asked, like, why? Why me? Why is this my life? And so I think transitioning to having that kind of faith and trusting that there's something out there that's believing that's going to take you and guide you through the things that you're going through is super powerful. And that's something that's really, for me, these past few months, I've really dove into because I was, been in dark places myself. I still go through things as you go through trauma, and something, having faith in God has really helped me develop that faith aspect of, I can get through each day, regardless of who's on my team and who's not on my team. There's always one person on my team, and that's God every single day. So that's I'm glad you brought that up. That's something that's really helped me these past few months and, honestly, my whole life without even me knowing it.
Yeah, no, that's super cool, and certainly something that lends a perspective that nothing else really can. And lots of times we don't understand why we've had to, or why others have had to go through things that we would never wish on anyone. And through that faith lens, we maybe still don't have a full appreciation for why, but it helps. And certainly it certainly helped ground me and lots of the guests that I've had on the show. So you kind of alluded to the fact that maybe you do a little mentoring these days. You've lived through what a lot of young men are trying to survive. You also found success as an athlete. If you could go back and speak to your 15-year-old self for a minute, what would you say to him?
Honestly, I think there's one thing that separates all great people from everyone else, and it's just that they don't quit. And that's the one thing. And I'm not meaning the sense of don't quit on what you're doing or those kind of things, but even don't quit when you're having those suicidal ideations and going through those things. There's so much more to life that can give it to you. So I just think don't quit. Life's not a sprint. We live in this world where we think it's a sprint, but honestly, life is a marathon, and it's a never ending marathon that you're continuing to run and taking different courses and different paths. So I think that's had 1 minute to go back and talk to myself is just don't quit. There's going to be lots of times where you want to, but don't quit. And then the other thing I'll add too is just add a sense of gratitude into everything that you're doing. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be grateful for all the big wins, but just the simple things of, I get to have a meal today. Oh, I'm really grateful for this water I get to drink today. And that's one thing that I kind of wish my 15-year-old self would have done a little bit more of, just so, to help keep my own self regulated and those kind of things.
Yeah, completely. Again, talking with Nick Peck, author and former collegiate athlete, mentor, podcast extraordinaire. One question I ask routinely, and I love music and I love how it can convey emotions that words oftentimes can't. And it's been interesting even asking the question because it seems like there are two brands of guests, those that can come up with this answer right away. And then there are non-music people and they're like, I have to get back to you. But the question is, if we were to watch a montage of your life, what song or songs would you pick to play in the background and why?
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, I'm a Cali kid. So, obviously, I love rap and those kind of things. And someone who's been a big inspiration to me my entire life has been Nipsey Hussle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with who Nipsey Hussle is,
Yep.
but
Yep.
he's been, I've got a TMC tattoo on me for him. And so it would be the song Perfect 10. It's by Nipsey Hussle and VJ Mustard. And it's just a song I even on the Instagram post when my book published, it just really spoke to me. And, in it, there's a piece of when, Nipsey I think he's getting interviewed maybe on the Breakfast Club or something like that. And he's just talking in it. And he's like, I just didn't quit. That's the one thing that separated me between everyone else. I just didn't quit. And I think that's the montage I would want to have, because whenever I listen to that song, it's when I'm trying to celebrate a moment or feel those kind of things. And that's what I think the song I would want to have for the montage of my life.
Yeah. I had to just confirm real quick. I'm like grinding on my life. That's a Nipsey Hussle that's in my my gym playlist.
That is, yeah, neighborhood man.
Yep. Well, the title of the show is Becoming Undone, and frequently I have guests on who have accomplished a lot, but the whole idea behind it is even if you have come apart, you've still got a purpose left unfulfilled. So, what for Nick Peck is left undone?
For me, like I said, I found my purpose with writing this book for the first time. So it's something that I kind of plan on doing the rest of my life. So for me, I'm just going to continue to chase this dream of being an author. I've been lucky enough to become an Amazon bestseller already and make appearances on great podcasts like yours and TV appearances. But, for me, it's not necessarily that. It's just to be able to continue to tell stories that mean something and that can last a long time. And kind of like you said, for me, it's not selling 10 million copies, so to speak. It's more of just being able to fulfill that purpose. And if I can have just one person that it resonates with them some way or another, to me, that's the biggest blessing in the world. So I'd say just continue to chase this dream of being an author and see how far I can take it and see how many lives that I can impact. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing.
That's it. Like I really appreciate that perspective. I've heard it said that a book is the most valuable business card you'll ever have. And especially in 2025, you give somebody a business card, they'll throw it away. Like frequently, tap my phone and I'll share that contact. But you give somebody a book, especially if you've inscribed it personally inside, that's something they'll hang on to, and that will open so many doors. And I know that there are more works ahead for you. It's really been a pleasure chatting with you and learning a little bit about your story. I'm really thankful for your time. If folks want to follow your work, where can I send them? Drop some socials. I can put the links in the show notes and description, but where can I send them?
Yeah, the book itself is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everywhere you get a book. And then I have an author website, nickpeckauthor.com. And then I'm very active on Instagram, and it's at Nick Peck Author. I try to keep it very simple and easy, but yeah, at Nick Peck Author. That's pretty much everything where you can find me.
Fantastic. Well, Nick, thanks so much for dropping in. I really do appreciate it. And you're welcome back anytime.
I appreciate it. Super great for the opportunity.
Awesome. Last little bit, I always stitch this in. If you could just introduce yourself and say, and I am undone.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Nick Peck. I'm the author of Only Way Out, and I am undone.
That's tremendous, brother. That was really good.